Hey, this is episode number 36 of the UpRev Ninja podcast, and I'm your host, Tom Hudson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the UpRev Ninja podcast. If this is your first time listening, thanks for joining us. This show is produced each week with the single intent of discovering the tips, tricks, hacks, and lessons learned from our guests that has catapulted them into living the best version of themselves. Join your host, Tom Hudson, as he continues his search for the best methods to uprev his life. Now, let's dive into the show.
My guest today is Karen Drexler, who's the CEO of Sandstone Diagnostics, the manufacturer of Track. As CEO of Sandstone Diagnostics, Ms. Drexler brings technical and engineering capabilities coupled with business vision and entrepreneurial experience. She has been an active board member for public and private medical device and diagnostics companies for over a decade. Ms. Drexler founded and ran Amira Medical until its sell to Roche Diabetes Care. She managed a variety of functions across the company at LifeScan and executed the sale of the company to Johnson & Johnson. Ms. Drexler was named Female Entrepreneur of the Year by the Stevie Awards 2013 and Entrepreneur Woman of the Year by Silicon Valley Women's Fund 2002. A guest lecturer at Stanford University in medical device design and mobile health curriculums, Ms. Drexler also provides team support and mentoring for the Stanford Biodesign Fellowship and StarDex, an off-campus Stanford accelerator. Ms. Drexler is on Princeton University School of Engineering Advisory Board for the Keller Center for Innovation and Engineering Education. A native of New Jersey, Ms. Drexler received her MBA from Stanford University and her BSc in Chemical Engineering from Princeton University. She and her husband Andy, a fellow Stanford MBA, reside in the San Francisco Bay Area. Hey, today on the UpRev Ninja podcast, I've got Karen Drexler. How are you doing today, Karen?
I'm doing great, thanks. How about you?
Really well, really well. It's just talking before that we started recording here. Yeah, I love the type of work that you do in the industry as a whole. It's like I said, it's almost like it doesn't feel like work going in every day.
True enough. It's very rewarding to work in healthcare.
It really is, yeah. So, Karen, I've already read your bio out to my audience, but I would love for you to tell us just who you are and kind of like what you're all about and how you got to where you're at today.
Yeah, and the backstory often doesn't come through in the printed bios. I'm trained as a chemical engineer. I've always loved math and science, and engineering was a great way for me to get started. But what really determined my life's course here was my father's illness. So when I was in high school, maybe early in college, my father was diagnosed with diabetes. And by the time I graduated from college, he had passed away from complications of diabetes. So although my studies were focused on energy and at the time there was a lot of interest in alternate energy, when my father passed away, I decided what I really needed to do was help people with illnesses, work in the health space, be able to put my technical skills to work. And it's been amazing. It's everything that I've worked on. I can see the direct impact on people, how it improves their lives, sometimes how it saves their lives. And it's been a huge motivator. So I've continually been working in diabetes throughout my career, but I've also very carefully selected other fields where I know that I can have a direct impact on the user. So I've started companies in that space. I've worked for companies in that space, but it's all about who the end user is, who's going to benefit from the technology, from the service. And I can't think of a more rewarding place to be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, healthcare is definitely very rewarding, and being able to see the impact that you have, not just on the patient, but on the customers and on the family as a whole. And it just pays dividends.
It does.
So what about so sorry to hear this story about your father, and but I'm and I think that's speaks volumes about the person that you are. A lot of people can take a tragedy like that and then just ignore it or go down a different path, but you utilize that and put the use that energy to go down the path that you've been, and obviously you're very successful at what you do. So
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, so how does that translate into like your daily life as well? Both work and play.
So, from a work standpoint, I try to think about the customer, the end user, all the time. I encourage everybody in the company to have contact with people. So, obviously, with this current position with Sandstone, we're helping couples who are trying to start a family or trying to
Okay.
enlarge their family. And boy, talk about rewarding. You help a couple
Yeah.
that maybe has been struggling for a few years with trying to have a child, and it's one of the most stressful things that couples endure. So really putting yourself in the shoes of those people and knowing what it's like for somebody to take home a product that that they really are depending on, that is going to give them some information they don't have, is going to help them get to an endpoint that they haven't achieved. And this isn't like no offense, like a consumer software
Right.
product. It's not like you can release it full of bugs and people just expect you'll have the next rev. Here you're talking about people's health, their mental health, their well being. And quality is such a huge role. So, thinking about quality, really thinking about what it's like for that person who gets excited about this product that they're ordering, opens up the box, they want to get a result. It's just got to be right every time. And that has to permeate through everything we do. And it does at Sandstone. We're always thinking about who is that end user, who's the consumer, what's the problem we're trying to solve, how can we be empathetic. We actually have a number of people in the company who have been in their shoes, and it's really helpful to have people we can talk to all the time who can say, look, it's not just about selling a box, it's not just
Right.
about selling information, it's about solving a problem and changing people's lives, which is, again, an important thing that underlies everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, what have you found to be, for you a what's kind of held you back, or something that you've had to overcome, going down this path.
Yeah.
Again, this can be, personal or from a business perspective. You know.
Well, a chronic problem that I have is I tend to take on too much.
Ah, yeah. Okay. You
So
you
I'm
can't
not,
say no.
yeah, I'm not great at balance, although I think about it and I try. We've got personal need to be responsible to yourself as an individual.
Right.
You have a family, responsible to your family, and obviously, as part of your career, responsible to the people who work for you, to the people who are depending on you, especially if you're running a company. And at at times I have lost sight of one of these, usually in favor of being focused on career. So usually it's me. Usually a time for me is what takes the hit, especially when my family was younger, when my kids were younger. I very intentionally focused on family and work. It was all I could do. Uh, Now that my kids are grown, I have a little bit more bandwidth to try to deal with other things.
Right.
But still, for your listeners who have worked in startups, there are never enough people to do all the work. You're always stretching to get things done. That's the case, obviously, in larger companies as well. But in a startup, there aren't enough hands, and I'm really good at taking on too much. So there definitely are times when I've I've overstretched, and it disappoints me, even if it doesn't disappoint other people, if I can't deliver
Right.
on everything that I've promised.
Right.
So that's certainly something that I try to counsel people to pay attention to, because you need to take care of yourself in order to be your best self for the company, for your employees, for your shareholders.
Yeah, I do agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, you start to suffer, then everything around you starts to suffer,
Right.
and that can be anywhere from just not eating correctly or, just not getting enough rest. And much less, if projects are starting to fall behind, then obviously that impacts your customers and the patients. And, it's a dominoes, right?
It is, and very relevant to the discussion we're having for men's fertility, which is the space in where we're working. The evidence is very clear that men who are overstressed, who aren't eating well, who aren't sleeping enough, have reduced fertility. And some of the educational information and background that we give to men helps them understand what they can do from a lifestyle perspective, how important it is taking care of themselves in the fertility area. It's a very direct reflection. the health of the body relates to the outcome. So it's a message that is reinforced every day based on the work that we're doing.
So how do you how have you taken that information and integrated it into your own life, just in regards to, the more clinical studies you come across, and everything in regards to stress and how it impacts your life? How have you taken those lessons and integrated improvements in your own life?
Well, I've done better in some areas than others, but that's,
Yeah.
not surprising. I'd say the place where I've been most successful, and this is a long-term habit, probably 20 years now,
Okay.
is I'm in California. I'm very lucky. It's nice out most of the time. I do a lot of walking. I go walking to clear my head. When I have one-on-one meetings with people, I make them go walking with me.
Nice.
At first, this was viewed as really strange. You want to do what? Well, what I found over the years is it's so much less stressful to be out listening to the birds and seeing the clouds and standing side by side and having a conversation. It's really different than sitting with the boss across a desk, which is
Right.
just a situation that is set up to make people feel stressful. It doesn't make conversation flow. And so walking is a very fundamental thing. It's a very fundamental part of my day. I take phone calls while I'm walking. I have one-on-one meetings while I'm walking. It's good for fitness and well-being for me and the people I'm meeting with. But it also really does, for me, it encourages creativity and some space for thinking. Now, where I haven't done as well, I've tried to commit to, I downloaded Headspace, I've purchased other programs. I would like to learn to meditate. I have a hard time shutting off my brain. It affects my sleep.
Right.
And meditation, I know I'm a prime candidate for this as something that would really help me be more productive and help me be healthier. So it's a commitment that I've made to myself that I haven't quite figured out how to stick with yet, but it's an
Well, I
important
can
one.
tell.
Yeah.
Not that you need this, because I'm sure you've read enough studies. I mean, just considering that you've even looked at meditation, but I can tell you, yeah, it's in the beginning it feels like you're not making a difference at all, but it's one of those things that it's so just the changes are so small you don't see them, but at some point you'll look back and you'll be, wow, look at the shift. So I mean, yeah, consistency is kind of key, but still, I mean, I can't tell you, it's pretty life changing once even if you only do it a couple times a week, it can be pretty pivotal. So
I certainly have a lot of people, my friends and family, who swear by it, and I
yeah.
know that it's important. And I want to make a renewed effort here. When I first started reading about meditation and listening to podcasts, I have a fairly long commute, so I have time in the car.
Right.
And I started listening, and I thought, boy, what if I could meditate while I'm driving? And I had some close friends who very quickly said, that's really not a good idea.
Right.
The last thing you want is to zone out in traffic, and so I'm not doing it while I drive, but I do need to find other times to make it effective.
Well, it's and don't. I'm not trying to give you advice, but I think a lot of people, they get tripped up on meditation, thinking that they need to have an hour of time in a very calm, secluded place.
Mm-hmm.
3 minutes can be fine. If that's all you have, a couple of minutes, just close your eyes, set a little timer on your phone or whatever, and I can guarantee you can find 3 minutes. So
it's important. From everything I read, it is so connected with improvements in health and well-being. It's not to mention better thinking, creative thinking, which is all important when otherwise you're immersed in a busy day and a busy life.
yeah, I agree. Well, so Karen, what about just experiences? The story with your father was pretty, it was a pivot for you, and it changed the direction that you went. But how do you make sure that you're not getting stagnant? And not just from a marketable perspective, but you personally. How do you make sure that you're always kind of keeping that edge and growing?
I do a number of things. I do a lot of reading. And some of it, I mentioned I have a long commute, so I listen a lot. I listen to books. I listen to podcasts. I belong to a number of professional associations. I actually spend a lot of time mentoring. And it might sound like that's not a growth opportunity because I'm helping other people, but I find that I learn from it all the time. Most of my mentoring activity is either with women or with young people, makes
Hmm.
sense. I'm involved in two organizations. One is called ASTIA, one is called Springboard, that support female entrepreneurs. And I love being able to encourage young women who, even even in their 20s, they may have already run into messages about you can't do everything.
Right.
And being able to show them that I could have a family and a successful career is often enlightening to them. They may not have encountered someone who was able to even get that much balance in their lives. But I also work with students. I'm very close to Stanford University. I do some guest lecturing at Stanford, do work with other universities. And when I interact with students, I always learn things. Young people, especially with the movement of technology, young people are, it's where the trends are happening.
Right.
So when I learn what's important to them, I learn what they're thinking about. Just as an example, in interacting with some of these students, I learned how important it is for the millennial generation to look at the value, not just when they're purchasing an object, not just what the object is going to do for them, but what other of their values does this represent? Is this something that is environmentally friendly? Is it something that has an element of giving back? Is it something that has a social mission? These are things that 20 years ago, early on in my career, I really didn't think about. They weren't
Right.
part of that generation of consumer. But I'm learning and growing all the time from interacting with people who are going to be the next group that are changing the world. And it's extremely rewarding.
Yeah, no, it is. I trying to remember a few months back there was a story I read and it was around that about um, you know, don't do what you care about, do what you value.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, like I understand the difference there, but that was not anywhere in my line of questioning 20 years ago. It's just like that wasn't it at all.
No, it evolves, but you make that evolution by learning from other people, by
Absolutely.
being
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
flow. Um, so yeah, so it's great that I give back, but it gives back probably more to me. So,
Well, and I think the other thing that you have to get, being around students and being close to the technology and how they're using it is, some of the stuff that I mean, I'm an Apple. I love a lot of the products that Apple puts out, but what they've been doing with the health kit, um, you know, it's they started this. I want to say like 2 years ago, but
mhm.
how that's starting to transform people how they take care of themselves. And if you look at the Apple Watch, so many people are buying that purely for the benefits they get from a health perspective. It says, oh, you're stressed right now, because of your heart rate or whatever, you're breathing, you should relax. Little things like that. That's stuff we would have. It's only been around for a couple of years. I can't imagine what's going to be like in 20 more years.
Yeah. And that kind of trend is fundamental to what we're doing here at Sandstone as well. Is I had looked at this space, this home male fertility testing space a decade or more ago. I advised another little company that was looking in this area. And at that point in time, the consumer feedback wasn't great. It's like, really? Do I want to measure that at home? Now what we're finding as we're talking with millennials and even some younger folks is they're so used to the idea of having measurements around their body, around their physiology, around their steps and their blood pressure and their stress levels and their breathing. The idea of having another parameter that they can control, something as important as their reproductive health, is totally acceptable.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
really a change. Over the last decade, this is a significant shift in terms of consumer values. And it's really driven by things like the Apple Watch, the health kit, and this whole self actualization. So it's at the stage very well for a business like this, which is dependent on people wanting to take control of their own health.
It's and to pull all this back in, I think it's all about people being more unknowingly, possibly, but they're being more authentic and more vulnerable. If you would have
Yep.
asked someone, like our parents, grandparents,
Oh, yeah.
whatever, they were like, no, we don't. They would have got that very voice and like, no, I don't need that. They don't need to know that about me. Why should I care? And it was because they had shame or embarrassment or
Hmm.
fear. And so it's nice to see that some parts of that facade are starting to fall apart. and we're seeing through it. So
we see a tremendous amount of curiosity.
yeah.
So when I go out to conferences. We launched the product this year at CES,
Yep.
and we've got banners hanging up about, do you know your sperm count? Things like that. And we had so many men, even if they're not trying to reproduce, come up and talk to us about the product. They were curious. They were interested. They took our educational materials. We now have over 100,000 people a month who are coming to our educational website, which is called, by the way, don'tcookyourballs.com.
Okay.
It's very memorable.
Yeah.
But there's tremendous educational content there that a lot of guys just don't know some of the details about their body and how it works and what will impact that. And we're seeing that there's a real hunger for that information, and we're delighted to be in a position where we can provide some of that.
Well, there's so much. Okay, here's a term I don't think I've used before. There's so much fake news out there.
Yeah.
That, like fake studies, or even if it's real, you don't know if it's real. Like a number of years ago, I was living in San Diego, and I came across something, and I think it was a book actually, but they're talking about their sperm count, and like, yeah, I discovered putting my cell phone in my front pocket lowered my count. So if I put it in my back pocket, it actually went up over like 30 days or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to say it was a scientific study. It was just something I read. Could have been a blog or on Tumblr or Twitter. Who knows? But that's out there in the world now, and people are like, okay, so I can't have my phone within 17 feet from me. I can't have red meat, or I can't look at a glass of milk. There's so much fake news out there, and
yeah.
It's hard to know which way is up anymore.
It's true. And for years, I generally follow a pretty strict diet, but for years, the jury was very negative on eating eggs, for example. Eggs were linked with high cholesterol. Cholesterol was a huge problem. And that information, even information that seemingly was coming from very good scientific founding, has reversed. And eggs are not at the moment linked with higher blood cholesterol levels. So things do change over time. More data comes to light. But we try, as other people in this industry do, we try to be very responsible, to cite all the studies that are out there. We're in a position now where we can generate our own data. As we have an app, people are filling in information, sharing information about their health and habits and their fertility. We can start making more linkages. And the data story will continue to build. But you're right, people do need to take things with a grain of salt, look at what the references are, and make sure they're getting good, solid information.
Right. And, I think that's, it kind of comes back to, this whole thing, like, you say, take it with a grain of salt. It's one of these things that a lot of us, we take for granted, right? Like, we're not continuously trying to up-rev and become that next version of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with anything. We read a study, like, yeah, eggs are bad. Well, okay, that study's 20 years ago, there's new data. So, it's every facet of our lives we have to do that. So, so you touched on this a bit earlier, Karen, in regards to what you're kind of working on or what you're struggling, and that's on the meditation side. But I wanted to ask you, kind of two other questions. One was, what kind of personal habits do you have in place now to make sure that you're growing? I mean, you touched on reading and audiobooks and mentoring and being a part of organizations. Do you have any other habits? You mentioned walking one-on-one, anything like that you feel really kind of keeps you on your edge?
Yeah, actually, I mentioned I had studied engineering in school. Yeah. I minored in theater and dance.
Yeah.
And I've continued dancing through my whole life. One of the things that I love two of the things I love about dancing, it's great exercise, of course. But when I'm dancing, and I take dance classes that are choreography classes, so I have to learn something, I have to focus and pay attention.
Oh, nice.
It's like a vacation every time I take a dance class. And what I found over time is that it not only clears my mind and helps energize me. If I'm tired, the best thing I can do is go to a dance class, and I'll be great for the rest of the day. But I also find that I've got a real period of creativity after a dance class, because there are things that subconsciously start coming up when I'm thinking about choreography. So making sure that I don't neglect that. It's an area that I know for other people, it might be other artistic pursuits. I've heard this from people who paint or who do other things that are creative, that focusing on some other creative pursuit just unlocks creativity in your mind and enables you to think along different lines.
Well, it sounds like, and I agree with you. I think anytime you get in that moment of flow, you're getting a lot of the benefits of meditation, because you're not, thinking about, tomorrow, or creating all this anxiety. You're living right there in the moment, and you don't have a million thoughts racing through your head. Well, I would, trying to put myself in the right place, but so you are practicing a form of meditation when you do stuff like that.
Well, there you go. That's my start.
There you go. Yeah. So you already see the benefits right now.
I do, but I certainly live and swear by exercise. It's a huge part of my life, but particularly these things like dancing, where I have to disengage from the other things. I don't get the same benefits from being on the treadmill. So when I'm on the treadmill, I'm still thinking about work.
Yeah,
and
too.
Probably not in the most creative way. So, doing other things that frees up that energy is really important for me.
Well, so you touched on this earlier, Karen, in regards to balance. How do you do all of this? I know you said your children are a bit older now, but between family, business, the volunteering, all the stuff, it can become overwhelming. How do you balance it all?
I can't think about it.
Okay.
No, and I don't sleep a lot, but that's not a good answer either. You have to be very efficient. You have to really make sure that what you're doing adds value, and that you're doing things conscientiously. You don't just slip into doing something for an hour that doesn't need to be done, because there isn't time for that. So it does require being organized and knowing each day what you need to get done and staying on top of things.
Do you have a process that kind of helps you, prioritize or ask the questions you asked? Like, is this something I should be focused on right now?
Well, one of my favorite books is a book called The Power of Habit.
Yeah.
And I love that. Well, I love a number of things about it, but one of the things that struck me right away is how much of the normal day for people is engaged in things that are habitual. You spend half an hour having breakfast because that's what you have done for however many years.
Right.
And changing things up, I find, is very helpful to keep things flowing. So really trying to analyze how I'm spending my time and where I'm doing things that are routine, that I'm just doing because I've always done them, and finding ways to break that cycle is a great way for me to recover what seems like lost time.
Okay, I'm trying to think about what my life would be like if I did that. but it is funny. Like, there's a book called, a couple of people on the show have mentioned it, the 12-week year, and it's planning basically just plan a quarter at a time, because trying to plan a year is not only difficult, but you're probably not going to get anything done 12 months from now that you planned on right now, or at least not to the vision that you have. But if you chunk it down to that 12 weeks, it's a lot more manageable and not near as overbearing. And so my wife and I actually kind of do an exercise like that every 2 to 3 months. We'll go through our calendar and like, okay, what nights are date nights, what nights can I do this, and vice versa. And so we do kind of break out of that routine, but it's more probably every 3 months or so we do that. So
that's great. I like that.
And I have read that book, but I got to go back. It's been a couple of years, so I should go back and reread that, because I don't remember that being a lesson I took away.
Well, it really struck a chord with me. I guess the other thing that it reinforced for me was that you can think of willpower as a habit, and in some ways your most important habit. That if you can exhibit willpower, you can make changes, you can be in control of your life. And I mentioned earlier that I follow a pretty strict diet. To me, that's a form of willpower that has more than just the benefits of eating in a healthy way. It's a habit that filters into other things. It means doing other things that are hard is more natural, because sometimes sticking with a diet is hard.
Right.
So you kind of get into the habit of doing things that take willpower, and it's reinforcing.
Well, Karen, just kind of go into some of the wrap-up questions here. What about a mantra that you live by, or parting guidance, wisdom that you would like to impart? Let's say there's someone out there that they're struggling right now and they're trying to figure out the next stage of their life, or they're just at that crossroads and they're not sure what direction to take.
Yeah. I really try to envision, and I mean envision, like try to put myself in the place of where I want to be next. See what it looks like, see what it feels like, who's around me. Take time building that image in my mind. It's like what athletes do when they're envisioning a goal. You
Right.
talk to athletes who are trying to, break an Olympic record or have the perfect catch or whatever it is. There are a lot of techniques for envisioning that put you in the moment and help you figure out what it looks like, what it feels like to be in that place. It's not just thinking, oh, I'd like to get job X, but what would it be like if I was in job X? And who would I be interacting with? And then I kind of back up from there. Okay, if I'm going to be interacting with those people, what should I be doing? Do I need a different vocabulary? Do I need to, it's kind of like dress for success, but I'm not talking about dress literally.
Right.
I'm talking about thinking about what tools, what skills do you need to have to be effective in that moment that you can so completely envision, and using that to help drive your path forward. And I find those tools are very effective over and over.
No, I could definitely envision that and be a good development plan action, I believe. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So, what are you? Is there anything that you're currently working on that project, work, personal, anything like that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. Well, I took over as CEO of Sandstone Diagnostics last year, and this has been an interesting path for me because the other companies that I have run in my past have all been companies that I started. So I've been an entrepreneur since I was a teenager. Actually, started my first company is what funded my college education.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this goes kind of way back, but this is a different situation. This is a situation where I joined a company that I felt passionate about, and I joined them as an investor and board member. And last year, in working with the team, it appeared that I had the right set of skills to take the company to the next level. So it's been a very exciting transition, and just really exciting to bring the track product to market and be in a position where we can help couples who are struggling with this very difficult issue around fertility. But one of the key learnings for me, and this is honestly something I did not understand before, is if you go to the United Nations and you look at their definition of basic human rights,
Right.
being able to reproduce is considered a basic human right. And yet in the US, with our healthcare system, which was is hodgepodge together from years of not effective planning, let's say,
Right.
reproduction is considered optional. It's in the same category as facelifts and Botox injections.
Oh, wow.
So most people in the US who fundamentally, as part of their being, want to be parents, want to be part of the next generation, they are struggling to pay for what, again, for most people are out-of-pocket costs. They get very little help in the way of reimbursement or financial support around this fundamental human right. And all of us here at Sandstone, this is something all of us who work in this industry are really passionate that this is a fundamental right. You talk to people who've had this right denied, whether it's because of a medical issue or because they can't afford access to care, and it's devastating. So I certainly encourage anyone who's listening to think about that. It's, again, something as a company we fully support. We're trying to make care more accessible and make sure that people have the tools that they need in a cost-effective way that can at least provide some help in this very difficult journey for people who struggle with infertility.
Oh, again, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's it is amazing to know, versus the UN versus what other countries versus the US, how everyone looks at different issues. And,
Yep.
their take on it. But sometimes it's flabbergasting to understand. Like, wow. And this is definitely one of those cases.
Yeah.
So uh, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to bring up or discuss?
No, I think we've done a pretty good job covering things.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show today, Karen. I appreciate your time and telling us your story.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you.
That was an awesome interview with Karen. It's fun talking to someone who's so passionate about what they do in their, work and their profession. And, it was interesting because, she, talked about, how she loves mentoring and how she learns out of that and being a part of mentor groups. Just continuous improvement, how she, continues to read, again, going back to those mentor groups. And being out in nature, this kind of covered a couple of things. She realizes being out in nature is, healthy. She gets exercise from it, but she also utilizes this time to have one-on-ones with her employees and her staff. And I think that's a really awesome practice because it breaks you out of that, sitting across from the desk, from each other, or just, the day-to-day, atmosphere of, sitting in an office or a cube, so it breaks you out of that. She also talked about visualization exercises, which I found really great, clearing some of her limiting beliefs. And, she said she would really love to get into meditation and how awesome she's read a lot of stories about that and, case studies and how positive it is for your mind and for your health. Yet, when she talked about, the art that she does, I mentioned to her that she's getting a lot of the same benefits because you aren't thinking about anything else and you kind of get into that place of flow and you're just purely concentrating on that one activity. Yeah, sure, it's not the exact same thing as meditation, but you're getting probably, I'm going to say, a lot of the same benefits. So those were some of my key takeaways from interviewing Karen. What were some of yours?
Thanks for listening to the UpRev Ninja podcast with your host, Tom Hudson. Navigate to our website at uprev.ninja today, where you will find additional resources to help you discover the best version of you. While you're there, join our newsletter and join the discussion on your favorite social media platforms. We've got some awesome guests lined up to share with us how they are becoming the best versions of themselves. Again, thank you for listening. Now it's time to go out and uprev your life.